Digital crime incidents increased during the massive shift in consumer buyer behavior from physical retail stores to online retailers, providing cyber criminals with increased opportunities to defraud people. For more on what to look out for, we're joined by Charl van der Walt, who is the head of security research at Orange Cyber Defense. Charl, thank you so much for your time. And I mean, as I mentioned in my intro, we've seen that shift from physical retail to online retail. But before we get into, what people should be looking out for, what are some of the changes you've noticed, rather, from a cybersecurity point of view, pre-pandemic and now?
Thanks, Nastasia. So the big one has really been the adoption of e-commerce platforms overall, not only by businesses who need to accommodate their staff working from home, but also by shoppers who've adopted e-commerce platforms like grocery shopping on a scale that we've never seen before. In fact, I saw one report that argued that the amount of growth that we saw over the period of the pandemic in e-commerce was what they would have expected over the 5-year period to come. So it's been really quite extraordinary, and I think that's probably been the biggest change.
Right. What have you learned about cyber attackers and the way that they behave?
Well, attackers are actually quite predictable in the way that they behave. And one of the things that we can predict is that they like to use quite localized, sort of newsworthy developments as a premise for luring people into various traps and tricks. So we can predict with certainty that, when there's the Olympics, there'll be Olympics-themed things. When there's a COVID wave, there'll be COVID wave things. And I guess now we would have seen a wave of Black Friday themed schemes. There'll be Christmas ones, and of course, probably ones related to like New Year's, post-Christmas specials and deals.
Right. Before we get into those, that Christmas specials and deals, etc., the one thing that I can imagine will continue going forward, although maybe not at a larger scale that we've seen last year, is the idea of working from home and the access of public Wi-Fi, etc. I mean, what are some of the ways in which you protect remote workers from cybercrime, especially when they can work anywhere?
Yeah. So interestingly, we're not convinced that the fact that a user is at home technically makes much difference to the attacker. Rather, the big difference in our view is that working at home, the user doesn't have the opportunity to kind of bounce thoughts and ideas off other employees, and maybe is not as constrained at home as they would be at work. In other words, you're more likely at home to, follow a link that's sent to you about a special, or deep dive into an article about the top 10 most beautiful celebrities or something, than you would be at work. And you don't have the opportunity to check with a coworker whether that makes sense or whether it seems safe or unusual in some way. So it's really user vigilance, I think, is what's shifted because people are working from home.
So how does one protect themselves from cyber criminal activity, especially when you are engaging in online shopping?
Well, there's two facets to it. The one facet is clearly the technical facet, and I think the narrative there is clear and has been repeated often. It's make sure your system is updated, run an antivirus, be cautious what links you click on. Use strong passwords, use SMS or some other second factor of authentication on your phone, for example. But then there's the behavioral aspects also, and I think those are the ones where consumers need to be more vigilant now over the holiday season. And I think the sort of 3 key points that I would make is firstly to trust big brands when you're shopping. So, look for and understand the Take-A-Lots and the Amazons of this world, rather than the smaller, kind of less known vendors. The second is, I would say, go direct to source. In other words, rather than click on a link to go to Take-A-Lot or a link to go to Amazon, type it into your browser directly and search for what you're looking for. Similarly, if you get contacted by anyone, even your bank, asking you for something, asking you to approve a payment or provide a PIN or whatever, I'd say go straight to source. In other words, rather phone them back. If the bank's, fraud department phones you and says, there's fraud in your account, we need to do something, rather hang up the phone and phone them back. And then finally, and this may be a little bit counterintuitive, but I would suggest shopping with credit cards is actually relatively safe. The banks are quite adept at detecting fraud, and you've got some recourse if there is fraud on your credit card. So rather than a debit card, a credit card is a better option.
Charl, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That is Charl van der Walt, who's the head of security research at Orange Cyber Defense, talking to us about what to look out for, especially as you engage in your holiday shopping. But also touching on something that's quite interesting is that it may not always be that possible to protect, especially remote workers from cyber crime. All kinds of facets in terms of security measures would need to be implemented there from a company point of view. And we'll definitely have him back on the show at some point to talk about other measures that we can implement in our way and also in the way that we engage with our internet activity.